We got us a corpse and cartridge occasion.
Today was a crazy day. I made a bunch of videos. I wonder if you guys ever look at the top of the screen and see how many tabs I have open. It takes a long time to get this amount of research done. And for this video and previous videos, I have done a lot. Closing these tabs takes a heavy toll because when you spend hours collecting all of this information and doing research, it's hard to just hit that X button and let it go. But you always have to. In this video today, we will be talking about the new tweets from Harada and a whole discussion surrounding Christine, but also some stuff about Mokujin, Roger, and just the general discourse with the developers and the players. You know, something that I try to stress a lot is how we speak to the developers. Yes, I get a lot of people are upset and frustrated, but what we have here is special. Being able to ask Harada questions and he responds, that doesn't happen for practically any other game on the planet, right? So this is something that we don't take for granted, and sooner rather than later it will be gone. But while it's here, let's appreciate it. Let's talk about it. Where I would start this conversation is with a tweet from High Buff Gigas, where he's talking about how Harada went to Madagascar tournament and that turned into a character. So what about Turkey and Greece? Harada steps in with the most sassiest tweet I ever seen and basically says, just because I went to Greece doesn't mean anything. Stop spreading baseless statements like that. If we're going by that logic, then I've been to at least 60 countries. From that point on, a lot of players were making jokes saying add a Hungarian alcoholic character to the game. And then also, you would need to release 60 new characters, where Harada says that is already halfway true, which is why I talk about Tech Attack Tournament 3. A lot of people think Tech Attack Tournament 3 is going to be the same with Tag 2, but if you think about how many new characters have existed and how they're kind of taking priority over the legacy characters, that Tag 3 roster might look unfamiliar to you. Someone brings up a very good point here with Harada, where they ask him about two characters that never came to fruition. One is basically Taekwondo Girl, or if you're a memer, Taekwondo Tifa. This is a girl who was supposed to be added into Tekken Mobile as DLC, but it never happened because they canceled the game. This other character is Zoe, the Crow, and she's from USA. This character was supposed to be added into Tekken 6, but she was too revealing and the age rating for that game was going to have to be pumped up. Now, will they add it into a future Tekken game? I believe her fighting style was also supposed to be Krav Maga. This is a character who's requested, but in response to this request for both of these characters, Harada says, I'd leave this part to the next generation of developers / members of the team. And this is him once again referring to the fact that his time developing Tekken is coming to a very fast end. He's going to retire, and it will be up to Nakatsu to decide whether or not he wants to bring these characters into the game. I think it will be interesting to see when players start tagging Nakatsu and asking him things, asking him about characters, because we saw the balancing be shifted to Nakatsu, but with this tweet here, Harada is now switching character selections to Nakatsu. On the topic of Roger, someone says put him in a game. Now, Harada doesn't really give a definitive response to this. He only makes a joke about how Japanese people would respond to this saying Roger that. But in English-speaking cultures, that will be taken differently than just a joke. Someone else calls him out as a pathetic loser who's caving to the woke crowd and PETA. Very toxic message this person is leaving. In response to this person, Harada says, it seems you may be relying on information from the internet without verifying the facts yourself. I previously addressed this point and provided accurate information. For those of you who haven't seen these previous texts, basically Harada never said that. It was a news article from a very long time ago where he was misquoted, and that caused this ripple effect of confusion, one that even I was victim of. I was talking about how Harada won't do this, Harada won't do that, but basically it's all lies. It's not true. Harada never said that he won't add Roger into the game. He never said that PETA is not allowing him to do it, but I'm sure this conversation will come up once more. Now, there was a lot of people who was asking Harada, why are you ignoring me? Multiple people were saying this because Harada was responding to a lot of people except for them, it felt like. But Harada basically said to two people here, and this basically applies to everyone who doesn't get a response out of Harada. He basically says, I'm not ignoring you. You know, there's so many people who's DMing me and talking to me and tweeting me and adding me. I can't respond to them all, right? And this is why we should be appreciative when Harada do select us to be answered. Whether he's disagreeing, not agreeing, we should just know that it's one, he doesn't have to do this, but then two, there is so many people who's tagging him and stuff, and when he takes the time to respond, just be grateful for that. Now, where the conversation turns towards Christine is where someone says, I really want to hear you say just anything about Christine. You never respond when it comes to her. And Herata says, I do reply about Christine from time to time. The person responds and says, when you do, it's mostly negative due to spammers. Harada says, no, I think it's just that when someone starts off negative, the conversation naturally turns negative too. I have positive interactions with other people. Where he goes into the details of the character Christine, he says here, I understand how you feel. However, as someone who has been creating these characters from a conceptual stage, I never criticize the fans of specific characters. As such, Christie, for example, though in some cases I do respond firmly when the level of spam becomes excessive or when there are accusations based on misunderstandings, regardless of the character involved. I have been told that things like we don't need two characters many times by using the same words, and regarding the idea of an alternate type of capoeira. Well, that wouldn't likely be a capoeira anymore, and even such character were actually implemented, I'd probably be criticized again, this time with people saying this isn't Christie. But this is not the point here. Let me just say this again. This is not the point in the discussion, and it's not the reason Christine isn't appearing. So this part here triggered a lot of negative responses with people saying, you know, you're talking about alternate types, two capoeira characters, and if you do make an alternate for Christie, then she will basically lose all of her originality. I mean, think of how people hate Eddie, hate Lydia, hate Heihachi, hate Armor King. Actually, do people hate those characters? Maybe not, but their identities is gone nonetheless. Harada says, I already said twice that this isn't the point, so why are we trying to make it a point? Of course, there's room for creativity, that goes without saying. I have far more of it than you do, and I'm well aware of that fact. What I was trying to explain is simply this. Once Christie becomes something different from how she originally appeared, there's a chance she'll be criticized just for being different. That's it. Do I really need to explain everything? When we changed Jun Kazama's direction in the past, we faced relentless backlash. It took a massive amount of time and effort to establish that version of the character. That's coming from an actual experience. Naturally, there will also be people who are happy and excited to embrace the new version of Christie. That's a given. But in reality, there's a lot of people who aren't like that. The people who are more rigid, even borderline fundamentalists about character, I just was pointing that out. So for you to come at me with comments about creativity, that's a completely off the mark. The point you're trying to make, we passed that stage a long time ago. That's why I keep saying this isn't the issue here. You know what's really interesting about this as well? These statements like this from Harada get so much backlash now. Back then, literally like 8 months ago, a year ago, this would have had 15,000 likes. Everyone would have been like, yeah, Harada, you get him. But people are starting to see this for what it really is. You have all these people who are bringing up different examples where Harada is saying, you're saying not to use two capoeira characters, but at the same time, you're using two bears in every single game. Why are you putting two bears? Is what all of these people are saying. And Harada responds to all of them and say, why is it that even after I clearly emphasized twice, but it's not the point here, you still insist on discussing that exact point? Normally, I would expect the conversation to develop into something like, then if that's not the point, what is the actual issue you're referring to? And that's a good point. All of those tweets I just showed you where people were like, oh, well, what about the two bears? You guys are missing the point. He said that that's not the reason Christie is gone. He was just bringing up how that's something that people always talk about. Harada says that's how a constructive discussion should unfold. or I thought so. Now, if we go back to the tweet here, because we're not done with this one, he says, in any case, I believe most people understand that it's difficult to include every single character in a regular roster from every possible perspective. Think of it like this. You have about 32 to 36 characters on the base roster. Tekken 8 and Tekken 7 did that. And even then, they added about 15 to 20 characters as DLC, and there still was like 10 other characters who people wanted in the game. We know that 60 characters on a Tekken roster is way too much to balance, way too much to add, way too much to learn, way too much to lab. That number is impossible. So the best case scenario is that they pick characters who are really popular, characters who have story importance, and then probably just rotate the other characters, alternate games. Maybe this character will sit out Tekken 8, maybe that character will be in Tekken 9, then they'll sit out the next game. I know that isn't what people want, but that's the best that they can do, because Tekken just is suffering from success, and that success is having way too many fire characters, a fire lineup, and removing any of those characters is a complete catastrophe, and there's no way they cannot do that. That said, I've never come to dislike any of the characters I've created, nor have I ever criticized the fans of any particular character. I've said this many times before, that all of the characters are like my children. If you could at least understand the point, I'd appreciate it. Though I also understand that not everyone will agree, but still, I hope this part reaches you. I understand the players' frustration, but I don't think they should take their anger out on the developers. This is a very massive poll that was done on Reddit a couple of years ago. And when you look at this poll here, you can see the characters who's at the top 10, you can see the characters who's in the top 11 to 25, and you can see all the other characters who's down here at the bottom. But note here the character at 64. Most Tekken players do not want this character, and that is the biggest hurdle for this character. When your character is under unplayable boss characters right alongside combat, you know you're in a dicey situation. But at the same time, look who's 2 levels up above her, Raven. Raven made it into Tekken 8. Maybe Christy can make it into the next game. But I think right now with Tekken 8, there's a lot of other characters that the developers probably want to do and probably want to focus on, and that's probably what they're going to do.